There is an industry that affects 90% of everything we eat, wear, and own. Most people have never seen it, they rarely think about it, and it barely registers on environmental news. This is despite the fact that it employs 1.5 million people, is a lifeline for island nations, and serves as the backbone for our global economy. Shipping is a massive industry. At any given time, there are 100,000 ships in operation, carrying 90% of everything we buy. But shipping produces a gigaton of carbon every year. For a size comparison, that's about the mass of Central Park in New York. It's significantly less than air freight, but it's still a lot. Fortunately, an international collaboration of governments, businesses, and various organizations are trying to transition ships to more sustainable fuels. These new fuels could reduce the carbon footprint of 90% of the products on Earth. But it's not just ships that have to change. It requires fuel companies to make the fuels, ports to supply them, and customers to be willing to pay extra for sustainability. These new fuels, made with things like plant wastes, hydrogen, and captured CO2, are being developed and produced, and they can reduce emissions to as little as 1/10 of current output. But first, shipping companies have to decide which fuel they're going to use. No fuel has emerged as the leader, though many experts predict that hydrogen and biofuels will probably be the most successful. Then these shipping companies have to spend billions to either retrofit old ships to carry and use these new fuels, or they have to build completely new ships that can use these fuels. On the bright side, orders for these ships rose by 50% in 2024. However, many of these ships burn both conventional and sustainable fuels because the sustainable ones can be hard to find. Fuels are only considered sustainable if they're made in plants that run on renewable energy. So if the producer doesn't use renewable energy, they can't make sustainable fuels. Also, they need a committed buyer. Sustainable fuels cost up to 4 times more than conventional ones, and they need a whole new supply chain to give them the ingredients for the new fuels. Fortunately, solutions are being developed to make this easier. In 2024, 2 organizations introduced a book and claim system to help increase the adoption of sustainable fuels. With book and claim, if shipping company A can't get or use sustainable fuel, it can buy some for shipping company B, which can get the fuels. Then company A claims the carbon credits, essentially paying for someone else to reduce their emissions to cover your own. That helps with the next problem, making sure that ships have access to fuel. Currently, more ports like the Port of Rotterdam, Yokohama Port, and the Port of Los Angeles are trying to provide the new fuels for maritimers. They're part of a development plan called Green Corridors, where ships that use clean fuels can always get a top-up. It's like the charging stations for electric cars. The more ports and shipping routes provide sustainable fuel, the more ships will transition to these fuel sources. The European Union, the International Maritime Organization, and others are passing regulations that make it imperative for the industry to get serious about cutting emissions. Some of the biggest ones came online in 2024 and 2025, but others are getting in on it too. A group of big companies, including Amazon and Patagonia, recently announced that they would only work with shippers that could promise them zero emissions. They have regulations they have to meet too. In the short term, building ships that run on new fuels and developing the infrastructure to provide that fuel globally will take a lot of work. But it will also create whole new industries and help us stop turning the things we buy and use into a source of poison for the air we, and all who live on this planet, need to breathe.